On November 15th, 2001, Halo Combat Evolved was released on the original Xbox, revolutionizing the FPS genre, and throughout the years, it has garnered the reputation as one of, if not, the best game that has ever been made, getting critical and commercial success, putting the Xbox into the spotlight as a gaming system with buying more than 6 million copies were sold of this game that year, and many more after the release of the remastered versions. You know, I wanted to put the original Halo to the test and see if it really was a masterpiece. Of course, we must consider that this game was made over 20 years ago, so graphics won't be really a factor in this discussion. I understand this is a remaster and it's Halo Combat Evolved, anniversary. So, I mean, I will give my thoughts on graphics here and there, but it's not gonna affect the final score. All of this goes without saying. There will be a lot of spoilers in this video. If you, for any reason, haven't fucking played Halo in the last 20 plus years, go play it. Seriously, without further ado. Anyway, let's get on with this video. We start the game with a large fucking ship going across the screen named the Pillar of Autumn, a ship that, as we later figure out, is being chased by an unknown threat for an unknown reason. As the ship flies in the distance, we see a halo. See what I did there? Okay, never mind. We see a ring which will be especially important later on in the story. Apparently, the Pillar of Autumn made a blind jump into what I assume was slip space, coming from some place called Reach, and we all know what Reach is, right? From the previous games. They go on to explain that the Covenant, which are big baddies in this game, a group of races coming together to form an army, essentially, have faster ships than us, which would imply that they will eventually, catch up to us. I fucking love this intro, no need for exposition BS like every goddamn Ubisoft game, like Jesus Christ. They put you right into the action, and it gives a sense of urgency. We are being chased by something called the Covenant that we don't even know yet. People are hustling all over the screen. It really puts you into the shoes as somebody on that ship deck. A lot of games feel the need to give you past, present, and future type conversations. For example, saying this happened in the past, which is why we are fighting. And in order to hit them back, we are doing this now, so later they won't fight us anymore. It's like, what the fuck? Like, I don't care. Give it to me organically. If you do it the other way, it'll take the story out of the story. But this game does the opposite. It does exactly what it needs to do. Cortana, an over-sexualized AI, tells us that 3 capital ships are making their way to the ship, and in a very short while, the ship will be boarded. Which prompts, George fucking Clooney here to alert everyone to get to their stations, including us, the player, the Master Chief. So as she wakes up, we get a brief rundown of things by a dude in which his face doesn't match his voice. Like, the fuck?
Quick thaw, Master Chief. Things are a little hectic right now.
This brings us to the tutorial on how regeneration, moving your mouse works. They literally have a tutorial on how to move your character's head. Like, I understand this game was made in 2001, but Jesus, I think everyone knows how to move a character's head or move a mouse. There was no need to have this tutorial here. But like I said, this game was made in 2001, so not a lot of people know how to control a proper FPS back then, I guess. As soon as we finish this brief tutorial on how to control our character, the Covenant boards the Pillar of Autumn. We understand that these aliens are, by witnessing little Sam here get fucking murdered in cold blood. Like, Christ. You hear his screams.
They're trying to get through the door! Security! Intruders in the IO2! Please don't!
Sam! Sam! Come on, we've got to get the hell out of here.
Since we do not have any weapon, we have no choice but to follow the homie and get off the ship. As soon as we hit the door, the dude fucking dies by explosion. leaving us on our own to get out of here. You know, I love this. It really sets the tone as to what these enemies are and gives us urgency to get off the ship. Not to mention, we have no weapons at the moment. You have no choice but to witness the horror that is going on around you. There are even some minor jump scares in this opening act. I don't think any other Halo has done this, to be honest. I wish they all did. You literally see everyone getting murdered around you, and you cannot do anything to help. Absolutely love it. You know, I think the closest thing to this was Halo 2 in their beginning mission, where you're defending Cairo Station. It's kind of a parallel there, but, you know, not the same as the first Halo did. Eventually, we get to the man, the myth, the legend, Captain Keyes, which for some reason is completely calm. Even after the Pillar of Autumn is getting shit on, the man keeps his composure and doesn't lose his shit. Gotta hand it to the man. He introduces us to our AI girlfriend, Cortana. Right off the bat, Cortana is a likable character. The way the voice actor gives off her lines is incredible. I even heard that this was her first voice work ever. Gotta hand it to her. She's incredible. You know, anyways, Captain Keyes and Cortana, give us the rundown on what's going on. You know, I guess we can't escape the Covenant, so we have to abandon the Autumn, which I guess makes sense. Keyes gives us an important order and tells us to never leave Cortana. Don't let her get captured, because if they do, they can learn about everything, even Earth. My biggest gripe about this, though, is how the fuck does the enemy not know where we're from? I mean, isn't that rule number one in war, to know who you're fighting against and where they're from? I don't know. Maybe Keyes meant it as in not to give him the exact location. I mean, regardless, it's not a big deal. I'm just nitpicking. You know, maybe it's because humans have colonized a bunch of worlds and they can't pinpoint the exact origin of the species. But, you know, I don't know. It kind of seems like an oversight. Soon after, Captain Keyes gives us an unloaded handgun. See, now why the absolute fuck do you have an unloaded weapon? Aliens are literally boarding the Autumn and you keep your gun unloaded. Regardless, this is when actual combat is introduced to us, and nothing is really special about it. It's an FPS, controls like any other FPS, you know, besides a different button layout, but it's relatively the same. The gunplay and sounds feel chunky, which is a plus. I always like that. I will say, though, between the remaster and the original, the sound effects are different. And I will say I do like the remastered sounds a lot better. All of this goes into the Magnum, right? The fucking beast. And I say that with as much happiness as I can because it brings me way back. So back to the story. So Chief, Cortana are walking through the Autumn, shooting baddies, saving Marines. The problem with this, though, is nothing radical happens in this mission. It's really only about the Autumn going down and us getting to an escape pod and escaping. There really isn't another goal that goes along with this. There's some great moments in this mission. For instance, where Chief goes through these, you know, narrow walkways with grunts around the corner. It's great, and it adds a certain type of horror. Even though it didn't scare me, it was still a nice addition. You know, eventually we get to the escape pod, and Chief says one of his famous one-liners.
Punch it.
The escape pod gets launched out of the Autumn, and we see a big fucking ring, Halo. You know, the pilot homie decides we should land on this thing. Okay, I guess. Like, I feel like my first thought process is if I escaped from a ship and there's this planet on the other side of the ring, and this ring we know nothing about, like, we may know something about this planet, but not the ring. You decide to land on the ring. Maybe the escape pod couldn't go far enough, so the ring was the only thing that it could land on. It just seems kind of ridiculous to me, but anyways, it's something to further the plot, I guess. Anyways, this kicks off The second mission, Halo. As soon as we land on the ring, we see everyone dead on the ground within the ruin of the escape pod wreck. Master Chief and Cortana are the only ones alive. Funniest part about all of this is Master Chief was standing up through all of this, but still survived. Cortana even mentioned this in the previous cutscene. I found that callback pretty funny. Regardless, Cortana pretty much tells us that we need to get a move on because the Covenant is going to be all over us. So that brings us into the mountains covered in trees and rocks. This is a good time to mention the open-ended nature of these levels. It's quite amazing. Little do you see the narrative adventures, let alone an FPS, do this kind of level design. This is going to pop up a lot within the game. Can't commend this enough. It's what Halo is known for. We then first encounter Marines that have survived the crash from a different escape pod. We then kick off some alien ass while the Marines are safe and talk to them. We get approached by the worst remake of Sergeant Johnson I've ever fucking seen. Like, my God. He tells us that everything is a mess, that there are Marines scattered all over this part of the ring. Called for evac, but nothing could get to them. You know, to go back to Sergeant Johnson, if you look at Halo 1 remaster to Halo 2 remaster, nothing alike. I mean, even Halo 1 remaster, just Halo 3 in general, it's just bad. They at least could have done a remake similar to Halo 3, but no, they went a completely different direction. Now, I swear this was the first time I've ever heard Sergeant Johnson call Chief Sir.
It's a mess, sir. We're scattered all over this valley.
When he first said it, it caught me off guard a little bit because I did not remember it. You know, yet again, this game was the first in the series, so it makes sense that they really did not have Johnson's background and personality set up yet. Still, it was really weird to me to hear, and I wish that the remastered version kind of fixed up the dialogue just a tad bit. Anyways, this led to a wave-based combat encounter where enemies would come in through drop ships, and when you killed off a wave, another Covenant drop ship would come by. This is a very basic way for the game to implement enemies within the level, and I wish they would have done something different. I'm not saying that this was overall a bad experience. I'm just saying it isn't creative in a way that engages the player. They could have done a lot of stuff differently that involved the story, but no, they kind of took the easy way out. And it's like, hey, there's these Marines, there's waves of enemies, protect them for 3 waves, then you're good. I mean, there could have been a better way to do this. And a lot of games fall victim to this. And unfortunately, Halo was one of them. Afterwards, after we defeat the waves of enemies, we get introduced to Foehammer. And Foehammer is the character that pilots the Pelican in all the missions. Not very big of a character, but nonetheless, she's still in it. She picks up all of the lousy Marines who could not hit a single fucking goddamn alien, and then drops off a Warthog for, you know, the player to use. And to go into the Warthog mechanics briefly, it's horrendous. Like, Jesus Christ. You could drift anywhere constantly, and when you try to go 0 to 60, you burn out for 5 seconds. It is infuriating, and I'm so happy that they fixed this in Halo 2. But my God, the Warthog mechanics in this game, I just can't stand. Not to mention, if you're playing solo, you can't pilot the gunner seat without exiting the driver's seat and then going back to the gunner seat to shoot. And at that same time, the AI can't drive the Warthog. You know, and they fixed this in Halo 2, Halo 3, etc. because it was a big thing that everyone wanted. But in this game, it's just like, well, if you're solo, you just can't do it, and it sucks. To go on, one of the highlights of this level was the amount of intriguing architecture that was being implemented. I remember when I first played this game when I was young, I was so awestruck by the buildings that were put there. You know, after you see these structures, you start to question who put them there, what was the real purpose of this ring. And later in the story, we eventually find out who built it, which we'll get to later. Anyways, Chief's job now is to find the lost survivors and save them. And they're in 3 different sections of the map. One is on a hill next to a structure with some rocks covering it. And then the next section, there's a whole bunch of rocks with dropships coming down in the open area. And then the final version is there's a whole bunch of buildings that you can go in and save the Marines, etc. The chief and Cortana eventually find a group of Marines near a structure, the one I was talking about briefly, taking cover on the top of a hill, and you find a sniper rifle next to a dead body once you get up to where the Marines are. You know, let's just take a moment and appreciate the sniper rifle in this game. The weight of this thing is insane, and it is so satisfying to use. If this weapon was in every single level, I'd be rocking it every single level. After we clear out the wave, we literally do the same exact thing in the next 2 sections of the map. It gets extremely repetitive, and you will see it a lot in this game, but you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. Once again, the game is old, made in 2001. This shit is just bound to happen, but still, it gets infuriating, and it gets even worse later on in the levels, like to the point where you have a level that goes like what you'd expect, copy and paste whatever it is, but then a few levels down the line, it's going to be the same level but backwards, and it happens a couple times, and it's like, come on. Anyways, once we get all of those guys saved, and Sergeant Johnson in the back fucking shooting the machine gun, going ham. After all of that, we get to the final section and save the Marines that were in the structures. And after we do that, a faux hammer comes and gets us off the level and puts us in to Truth and Reconciliation. Truth and Reconciliation, going into this mission, the whole point is to save Captain Keyes. Cortana says that he's being held in one of the holding chambers. At the start of this mission, Chief starts off with a sniper rifle and an assault rifle. But before we get too deep into this mission, I just want to point out how much I love the ambience going on. It's nighttime, you got a sniper rifle, and they're stressing to you that you need to be quiet and pick off the Covenant one at a time. The problems arise, though, when you realize that this game has literally no stealth. You can't do it at all. Enemies will always know where you are and are extremely accurate when it comes to shooting at you. You need to stress this, and it happens a lot in games. Do not put a character in a stealth situation when you don't have the necessary stealth mechanics in your game. It is the most annoying thing to happen and will bring down the game's immersion tremendously. The mission would have been so great if stealth were even slightly implemented. Anyways, the majority of this level is pretty much going through the canyon and fighting off enemies until you get to the capital ship. And to be honest, I was getting a little bit bored during the first part of this mission. Maybe it was because I've played this game countless times, or it's because it's just bland. Regardless, when we get to the capital ship, we do the same old thing where we fight waves of enemies until we get 2 hunters that drop down. I played some dramatic ass music for this, but as I said before, hunters are super easy to kill if you have a magnum or sniper rifle, so it's not that difficult at all. Once we get onto the ship, there's no one there. At least not yet. The one thing I love about this is that the Marines that are there with you comment on it. Afterwards, they're invisible elites and all sorts of enemies that are coming after you. I love this too for the fact that if you are on harder difficulties such as heroic or legendary, the Marines literally get fucking slaughtered by the invisible elites everywhere. It's so funny, but also makes sense within the game that there's an urgency there as well, because of course you want to save the Marines, so you try to kill all the enemies before they even get close to your fellow soldiers. It's what this game does great. Unfortunately, that is the end of the fun in this level. The only thing that you do after this is go down copy-pasted walls until you find keys, and along the way you kill enemies. That's it. Seriously, there is nothing cool here, interesting or anything. Nothing of that nature. It's so fucking sad to come back to this game trying to look at this critically, and the only thing your mind comes to is this game kind of sucks at the moment. Still, I do understand that this game is old, but my god, is it really? It's starting to become a chore to complete this game. Everything looks the exact same. There's no variation. Copy paste this, copy paste that. You clearly can fucking tell that they made this game in a rush and we're on a crunch time. I'm just going to move forward on to the next level. It's not even worth going into depth on this level. It was painful. Let's just move on. The Silent Cartographer, probably the single most famous level in all of Combat Evolved. The Silent Cartographer, in regard to the storyline, apparently the Covenant thinks that this Silent Cartographer is on the island that the level takes place on. Cortana states that this map room will eventually lead us to Halo's control room. The storyline for the mission isn't really all that bad. She just needs to find one thing that leads to another. Fair enough. Cortana then goes on to say that the island has a whole lot of structures, and at least one of them holds the map room. It's a hint in regards to the level layout. This level is just like level 2 Halo. Very, very open. There are even sometimes within this level I got lost, which is a good thing, but later on you'll see it can be a bad thing if you do it wrong. Anyways, once we land, we're greeted by a bunch of Covenant enemies. Chief takes them all out, then Foothammer drops down a Warthog, effectively starting the mission. We eventually make our way to an interesting structure and get out of the Warthog and, of course, fight some more enemies as usual. Though the Cortana says that the Covenant are putting up more of a fight than usual, which would indicate that the Cartographer is nearby. Once we get down to the door, that would get us to the Silent Cartographer. Of course, we get told that Cortana underestimated the Covenant's understanding of Halo. I have a huge problem with this. Okay, it very much feels like they did this only to pad out game time. They will make the player go around the island one more time, and then when the player comes back, the door will magically open. It's just poor writing. No excuse, to be quite honest with you. And I understand it's an FPS, gameplay comes first and then story after. Especially in Halo, it's what it's known for. The combat's great. Don't get me wrong, the combat's a masterpiece and it has revolutionized the gaming industry, but when it comes to story, it fails. At least the first game. And when you consistently, throughout this game, make up bullshit to cover up plot points, it just becomes unforgivable. I just really don't understand how hard it could have been to produce another reason for why the door was locked. We have never seen that the Covenant effectively understood Halo's technology, so why would we believe that they know how to lock a damn door? It's poor. I don't even know. Regardless, we give the news to Captain Keyes, in which she's looking for something else that will be explained later. We then, I guess, explore the island to try to find a way to disable Halo's security systems, which leads us to 2 hunters guarding some sort of structure. We take care of them, of course, but we encounter something that is interactable. Keep in mind that this is only available in the Master Chief Collection. I'll let it play for anyone curious.
Entropy. It has now been 3,000 years since my last contact with any of the other caretakers of the Halo array. Despite clear communications protocol, my fellow monitors have either chosen to ignore, or, more likely, have lost the ability to engage in our scheduled updates. The continued lapse of the domain means that we are stuck with achingly slow wormhole superluminal communications. Prior to this total communication shutdown, the only messages I received in the preceding 4,573 years were incomplete and quite perplexing transmissions from Installation 05. I suspected that Monitor 2401 Penitent Tangent was not functioning correctly for some time before his messages ceased. I have logged my concerns about his ability to perform his duties. At this point, however, I'm not sure who I file logs for. 2401 may be destined for madness. There are fail-safes for this, I know. I hope they work. I will continue to visit the projection systems at the assigned dates. Perhaps the other monitors are dealing with interfering galactic phenomena, or unexpected system failures. 3,000 years of system failures. Indeed. In the meantime, I have exhausted all scheduled research activities assigned by the Council. Once those experiments were complete, I shut down all Sentinel function and put myself into a state of significant hibernation to measure performance of the installation with negligible upkeep. After 150 years with no noticeable impact upon installation systems or integrity, even in hibernation I became bored. This was quite troubling, as I was led to believe I was not capable of such a state. This was one of the gifts I was promised. An end to strife. I am aware of the dangers of a system such as myself losing operational focus. Quite troubling. I wonder if my fellow monitors are experiencing similar states, or if this is because of my particular path to this installation. For amusement, I have begun a series of experiments involving the evacuation of all matter from contained sections of my installation. By measuring the geologic effects of exposure to the vacuum of space and the eventual biological recovery of these sections, I anticipate getting valuable insight into emergency response scenarios in case of sentient proximity warning.
In short, the cutscene goes over what the halo array is, and the monitors who are monitoring it, explaining things about this unknown creature. But to be quite honest, it's not too important to the story that's being told within Combat Evolved specifically, so I'm not going to dwell on it. We go through more and more waves of enemies until we reach another structure. Thank fucking God that the structure isn't a copy-paste from the previous one, because if that were the case, I would be in disbelief for the sole reason that this level is meant to be open. If you had each structure copy and pasted, there would be nothing to explore, essentially. You would have seen it all, but thank God it did not do this. Anyways, we fight some more easy-ass hunters. We go to the control room, that is the security system, and we shut it down. Little cutscene plays where an elite comes running at the door and so forth. I don't understand this cutscene. I don't even know why it's here. I think I'm just still mad at the fact that I even had to shut off the security system in the first place, so let's move on. Anyways, we fight some more enemies that are waiting for us after we had shut down the security system thingy for the ring. They really aren't that hard. There was a couple of invisible elites, but for some reason they were really easy to kill. But while reading the script, I will say that it makes sense because, I mean, in order to balance the game, to make invisible elites just a tad bit easier for the player, lower the health. So I get it now. I'd imagine, though, that on Legendary or Heroic difficulty, it will be a lot harder. We make our way back to the first structure that had the elite guarding the door, and we make our way down. Yet the elite wasn't there. See, like, as I said, I don't know what the point of the cutscene was. They could have just not shown the elite. I know he will show up later when we make our way back up. Still, it's just kind of stupid. Once we go down far enough, another cutscene will play when you step out onto this little platform thing. I'm not sure if this is a completely optional cutscene, but nonetheless, it just shows how far down you are, which is a cool thing, I guess. In all honesty, you just walk through copy-pasted hallways until you get to the place you need to be. And this game suffers from this time to time, and it's getting so old. Like, sure, it's fun when you're mindlessly playing, taking the game for what it is. You know, Halo is known to be a combat FPS oriented game. The story comes second, at least in this game specifically. But like I said, it's just, I don't know. Like, you're critically analyzing this game, and it becomes a boring experience through that specific lens. It sucks, and I never understood it until now, and I feel like I can't look at it the same. Thankfully, the next games, I haven't played them again yet. It's been like a few months, but it fixes this to a certain degree. Afterwards, there's a brief conversation between Cortana, Foehammer, and a Marine. They pretty much talk about how dropships are coming in hot and they have nowhere to go. Cortana pops the idea that maybe they can get inside of the structure. The Marine says that he can't and will hold off the Covenant for a certain amount of time while Chief finds the Cartographer. This wasn't a super important thing to point out, but I do like the world building that was going on while you're doing shit. Once we reach the Cartographer, we understand now what the control room is. Cortana tries to contact Captain Keyes, but I guess his radio's out of reach. We can't contact him. I love it because it's foreshadowing. You know, anyone who has ever played the game will understand why we can't contact him. Anyways, we go on our way to make it out of the structure that we're in. I will say there was a part in the sequence where I just couldn't find my way out, and it was the product of copy-pasted walls, hallways, and shit. And I can't stress enough that this game suffers fucking tremendously from this, and it's not even remotely funny. It's plain unfun To be honest with you, I was about to quit the game when this happened, but I managed and made my way out. And along the way, I got the shit scared out of me. Here's a clip. You can actually see me panicking with my mouse.
Roger, on my way.
We get into the Pelican with Foehammer. Cortana gives her the coordinates of the control room that we found from the cartographer. Foehammer then acts surprised and says that the coordinates are underground. It's also a surprise to us as a player as well, for anyone, who's never played this game. We found out that the place where we met those two hunters is actually some sort of doorway that leads us underground to the control room, which is the reason why they were guarding it, which is very clever. It's a way of implementing enemies and tying it into the story. Wow. And that was the first good thing I've said in a while. Anyways, this leads us to the next level, assault on the control room, and God help me. I was not easy on this game through the script, but on this certain level and another level in the future, you probably know what it is, but help me, please. I'm going to shit all over this. Assault on the control room is a level, in my honest opinion. It's one of the worst levels in the game, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it because if I do, I'm going to have a stroke. Reading back on this script, though, I did spend a lot of time on it, so just take that previous statement back. Essentially, your whole goal through all of this is to make your way to the control room. Sounds easy enough, right? Well, no, you go through copy-pasted rooms over and over and over and over and over again, to the point where you'll want to quit the game right then and there. Not to mention there's another level in the game where it's the same exact thing but backwards, and you guys probably already know what that level is. Regardless, you get dropped down into the level by Foehammer and you're greeted by enemies. Not too special, and afterwards you're going to be greeted by a room that you're going to get very familiar with. Same with the bridges that you're going to be crossing. After you get through all of those things, Cortana's going to mention simulated weather patterns underground. It's a cool concept, though I do wish it was elaborated on more. Anyways, it's literally the majority of the level, and I'm not kidding. You go through the same area and the same bridge constantly. It's the laziest, most god-awful level layout I've ever seen. I'm really trying to be positive through all of this analysis, but the game just keeps handing me things to shit on, and it's so hard to remind yourself that this game was made in 2001, so of course it's not going to be at the level of most AAA games today. Yet you become so accustomed to it to where you play an old game and you start to realize that, man, games back then just had a lot wrong going on. And I'll say most of the blame isn't on Bungie, of course. The blame really is on the time period they were developing the game in. As we go forth into the level, we start to realize that there are other soldiers, which makes no sense. We disabled the security systems. It was locked before. Did they get here before us, after us, at the same time? It was never really mentioned, so I'm just kind of gonna gloss over this. Also, Johnson talks. Why is he here? He's supposed to be with Keys on another level. It's probably because they didn't have enough voice actors to voice different Marines entirely, but it could have been easy just to have a developer voice the line. It honestly does scream crunch time or laziness to me, though I will say I'm being overcritical. I understand that it's just jarring playing other Halo games, knowing Johnson's a mainstay character, and in Combat Evolved, they were just getting his character started. And I think it was in the game files that his name is just Marine Leader, so he wasn't established. But it does get on my nerves just a tad bit. We keep battling enemies on the bridge and inside the structures as usual. I feel like this is a suitable time to talk about the OST though, since we're kind of in the middle of the game. We keep battling enemies on the bridge and inside the structures as usual. I feel like this is a suitable time to talk about the OST since we're directly in the middle of the game, which is where I tend to feel the most comfortable talking about such a thing. The OST is, let's just say, legendary. There's no other OST quite like Halo's. Every combat scenario, structure you walk into, or atmosphere that you're playing in, you will always be accompanied by some sort of music, and it does so very well. It even gets better in the later Bungie games. We all know the iconic Halo theme, and it's great to see that they will only use that certain track from the OST in special instances when something amazing, jaw-dropping, or some mystery has been solved. It's very much the most legendary OST of all time. Maybe it is the most legendary OST of all time. Back to the story, you will go through these little sections where grunts are sleeping and you can Will Smith slap the living fucking shit out of them and do so to all the sleeping grunts until they wake up because they heard you. Although I did say stealth was non-existent in this game, this is one of the few instances where there is some amount of stealth. Before you know it, after going through countless boring hallways, you'll eventually make your way outside where you can find some surviving Marines with a warthog nearby. I took the warthog for a spin and decided just to drive around for a bit and let the gunner shoot a lot of the enemies. You'll then run into an enemy tank known as a Wraith, yet for some reason the gunner on the warthog can literally take it out no problem. It's quite funny when it happened. I was like, damn, that's it. Still, I would imagine on harder difficulties that this Wraith would be a lot harder. Pretty soon you'll find a UNSC tank known as the Scorpion, and this fucking thing is a beast. Unfortunately, my squad mate was literally unloading a machine gun to the back of the thing. I'm not salty, it was just funny. I do believe it damaged the tank a little bit, but not to the point where it was, you know, fucking level breaking, I guess. And after you get the tank, you go on a little escapade that all Halo games have with the vehicles. They're always fun, probably the best part about this level, to be honest with you, because everything looks the fucking same, and this is the one part where you actually discover shit. The best part about this, though, is when hunters will meet you in the little tunnel area, and they just don't fucking stand a chance. It sucks, though, that when you have to open the doors for the tank to go through, you must manually get out of the tank, press a button to open the door, and then get back into the tank and drive, and it's very tedious. And going through the script and then looking back at the footage, I will say that this tank section just looks fun. I feel like this is what Halo excels at the most. These huge set pieces with huge vehicle sections, such as the Warthog sequences at the end of almost every game, or the giant tank sections such as this. All of them are a staple and usually the best parts about the game. And I know I shit on this game a lot, don't get me wrong, and I did quite a bit on this level, but I will say that I may be changing my mind later on in the game. Later in the tank section, you will meet a lot more Marines, which I don't even know how they got here, as I've said before, but the funniest part about this section is when I accidentally shot a rock and the explosion killed one of the Marines that was on the tank.
Take cover!
The Covenant are dropping in behind us! We're trapped!
I don't know, the Marines in all Halo games are just fucking hilarious, so I just thought I'd share this. Anyways, after the tank section, we get back on foot and just fight enemies as usual. Nothing too special. Then we go back into the same goddamn hallways as we always do. This is the part that makes me fucking hate this level. It is the same thing over and over again, just like previous levels. I'm not gonna, go through this whole thing with shooting enemies through the same hallways again, so I'm just gonna skip all this and go to something relevant within the story. We get to the point where we exit out of the same old building and look at the huge ass skyscraper looking thing that is the control room. We know this, of course, because Cortana tells us. She also tells us that we need to get to the top of the structure in order to even get in. So we take a Banshee that's conveniently placed next to you, which is a Covenant aircraft, and fly our way to the top. And once we get to the top, we're greeted by a shitload of enemies when we open the door. Of course, they're no problem, and we push forward. You get to the control center, and my god, this thing is beautiful, mysterious, and makes you ask so many questions as to what is going on and how this was made. And even to point out how iconic this scene was, if you look back at Halo Infinite during the reveal trailer of him in the control room, it's the exact same, and I swear every time I watch it, I get goosebumps. We jack Cortana into the control center. She tells us that the knowledge that is stored here is glorious and plentiful, and I guess this is the equivalent of an orgasm for an AI. Abundance of knowledge. The chief asks the important questions and, talks about the Halo ring. How do we use it? Is it even possible to use against the Covenant? But Cortana fires back and says that the ring is so much more important than just being a weapon. She then lets out a huge reveal that is important to the rest of the series. The ring was built by an ancient race known as the Forerunners. Cortana reveals that this place was built as a fortress world too, and then she pauses, leaving the player hanging, and I fucking love this. It brings tension and suspense to the scene in the upcoming level. You want to know what the hell she's talking about, and instead of just telling you what the ring was built for, they want to show you within gameplay, story, etc. But visibly, Chief gets irritated and tells Cortana to slow down and talk to him, but she explains that the Covenant have found something on the ring that was meant to stay buried. In her exact words, and I quote, something horrible. And she says that now the Covenant are afraid of what they have found. Cortana then blurts out unexpectedly that we have to stop Captain Keyes. And if you guys remember in the level, the Silent Cartographer, I mentioned Captain Keyes' radio went dead. We'll soon find out why. And at this moment, I started to realize that the game's story is starting to ramp up tremendously, and I love it. Although the setup was slow, I will say that the payoff is well worth it to an extent. And that brings me out of this level of Assault in the Control Room and on to the next. 343 Guilty Spark. At the start of this legendary level, Foehammer drops you off in this weird, creepy-ass jungle. Right off the bat, you can tell something is very different. The vibe and everything is just on a whole another level. To the left, you'll see a crashed pelican. It makes you wonder, what the fuck is actually going on. And once you get to the entrance of the facility, you will then see the Marine rifles just start firing off. And you can see the bullet tracers go everywhere. But when this happens, you kind of start to feel a sense of relief. You think that you will have Marines that will help, or at the very least, you'll think that they're about to go through a section of the mission with at least some help. But that isn't the case. Once you go into the facility, no one's there besides dead enemies or enemies that are shooting at you. You reach the elevator and you realize someone or something has just gone down. The elevator's coming back up. So at this point, you haven't played the game before. You become afraid. You feel uncomfortable with what is going on. You've played this whole game getting comfortable with the idea of going through the same hallways and killing the same enemies, blah, 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 blah. This doesn't go away, but the level is different. Yeah, of course they still copy-paste the hallways, but the atmosphere is so fucking immersive, like Jesus Christ. And to add on to this, there isn't any music. You'll either hear silence or gunshots. This level's starting to be my favorite so far. The chief makes his way down and you go around the corridor and you see a bunch of grunts and jackals just hiding. And at this point, you know for sure something is fucking wrong and you want to find out more. And after this, you fight some more Covenant, nothing too special, honestly, but all of a sudden we stumble upon what seems to be a normal room. Yet when we look up at the ceiling, you see this nasty ass booger juice liquid thing falling down. Now you know for sure you're about to encounter something. I remember when I was a kid and I was scared shitless and I needed to play co-op with my dad to even try to complete this level. Keep on pushing and we go through a doorway and witness a massacre of jackals, blue blood everywhere. This is the moment in the game where I started to enjoy myself whilst critically analyzing it. When you do something like this, it is so easy to focus on the negative, which to this point I have been. Yet now, all of a sudden, I'm enjoying myself. The atmosphere, level design, fear, everything. Why couldn't all the levels be like this? Anyways, you keep pushing forward. There's nobody, and I mean nobody in this room. It's weird how silent it is. And throughout this whole game, every single damn room had at least one enemy in it. And now we get to this and it's off-putting, but in a good way. Not to mention this is the first time we've seen a needler ammo. Like seriously, this shit looks so weird though, not gonna lie. We walk into a room and we see a lone Marine going batshit crazy, holding a magnum and shooting everywhere. He tells us we need to stay back and that he isn't going to turn into one of those things. Now at this moment you realize you're dealing with some sort of space zombie. Although this Marine is iconic, don't get me wrong, in the first game, I wish he weren't in it. It took away some of the suspense that was building. Us, the player, knows that when the word turning is involved, it is of course going to be zombies. So now the player knows we're gonna deal with something deformed or scary. Picture the Marine wasn't there and he just ran into the enemies, swarming you out of nowhere. Wouldn't that have been more crazy? Dare I say better? I don't know, maybe it's just me that prefers that way of introducing a new type of enemy, but regardless, it's not too big of a deal when you think about it, just being overcritical. Still, that atmosphere was still there. Encountering that Marine going crazy doesn't fully take away the atmosphere like I said before, but it does to some degree because he revealed what he was afraid of. If he would, in a different kind of universe where the Marine is sitting there and he was just going crazy shooting and never said anything about wanting to turn into one of those things, it would have been better because you would understand that the Marine's going crazy, something happened, he's seen some shit, but he never directly tells you. So not only that, but the suspense increases dramatically. And it's something little, but when you put something like that into a game, it like as in revealing what you're about to encounter, about turning into one of those things, it does take away it to some degree. And I know I've kind of repeated myself over and over. I'm kind of rambling, but I do want to get that point across. So after smacking the living shit out of the Marine, we move forward, putting him out of his misery, so to speak. We hit an important cutscene. The chief's about to open the door, but stops. He hears some sort of thing crawling around somewhere. You can already feel the tension going crazy. The chief opens the door and the Marine falls into his arms. Chief starts to question what the fuck went on here. He goes into the room with the Marine in his hands and lays him down gently. He then looks at his helmet, takes out what I assume to be is like a chip of some sort for recording, and then puts it in his helmet. But a video plays where Marines are getting dropped off in a Pelican with some silly dialogue going on, arguing about music from the old days. It's kind of funny. Nothing too important. You then see Marines go inside and observe what is going on. They stumble across an elite with a big ass hole in his stomach, I believe. Then the most iconic line from CE is said.
Looks like a Covenant patrol. Badass elite units. All KIA.
Real pretty. Friend of yours?
Now we just met.
The video fast forwards to see Keys telling a Marine to get the door open. Some unimportant dialogue happens, but nonetheless, the door opens. They go inside and see if everything is safe, and some more dialogue happens. Like, again, not too important, but they start to hear sounds that we've heard earlier. The Marine tells Sergeant Johnson to listen to the sounds. Everyone starts to question what's going on, of course, but then the door breaks open, revealing these spider-like creatures coming after the Marines. Everyone starts firing. We get to see these enemies kill Marines by latching onto them and then literally try to get inside them, and then poof, the cutscene stops. Put back into the game, and at the bottom right hand of the screen it says the Flood, revealing the new enemy. And I love this, the way they reveal it. It's the most iconic enemy reveal in all of gaming, I swear to God. Swarms of these little fucking creatures come after you, although they don't do too much damage. In large numbers combined with the combat forms, as you will see later, you can die so fast. Oh my God, they literally come fucking running at you. It's ridiculous and scary in every good way. I will say that in the old graphics, though, the Flood looks a lot scarier. They kind of dropped the ball in the remaster, but it's not a huge deal. It's like I said, yeah. To move forward, you get introduced to the combat forms, which are mostly infected Marines and elites, and I love how they use different designs for which species the Flood infected. And once you get later into the Halo games, when they add more like characters and species, they will actually add Flood versions of those species into the mix, which, I mean, I love it. It makes things not too dull. It's something little, but adds a lot. To be honest, the rest of the level is just fighting off the Horde while making your way out of the structure. I mean, typical. This is one of the times where I won't get annoyed at the backtracking in this game. With this, it actually makes sense because your sole mission is to understand what's happening and to find out where the captain is. And when you realize the captain's nowhere there and you encounter the Flood, you have to escape. And so, of course, you backtrack. Still, I do wish there were more room variations, as always. Fast forward, when you get to topside, you see a shitload of Marines that are willing to help you escape, and Phil Hammer tells you that there was movement all over the place and was wondering if everything was okay. But afterwards, you make your way to, a little tower thing where you get greeted by no other than 343 Guilty Spark, a monitor of the Halo ring designed to oversee everything going on the installation. He tells us that someone has released the Flood on this ring and that his main function is to keep the Flood contained on the ring. He goes on to say, of course, that he needs our help in containing the infection. He then teleports us, and Fohammer goes crazy like an ex-girlfriend asking where we are and that she lost her signals. It's kind of funny how the dialogue was delivered, effectively starting the next mission. And help me God, I hate this next mission. I wanted to kill myself so bad. Oh my God. At the beginning of the library, the camera pans throughout the level you'll be playing in. My God, I get sick of just looking at it. To put it simply, this level is the definition of copy and paste. It is the entire level. Also, not to mention the implementation of Rocket Flood, in which combat forms will wield a rocket launcher and shoot your bitch ass with it. Point blank. The single most annoying level in all of Combat Evolved. Afterwards, you get put directly into gameplay, not to mention the fucking humming of Guilty Spark. At this point, I'm just being an asshole to the game, so I'm kind of sorry for that, but to be honest, I am exaggerating this all for the camera. The level isn't really that bad, even though it does have a lot of flaws, and this goes for a lot of the game. And yes, I'm exaggerating for comedy, but at the same time, I'm not necessarily lying either. So instead of going over everything, I'm just gonna go over story details mainly and combat details briefly. If I did everything, it would just be me complaining about the same thing I've been complaining about throughout the game. So with everything set in order, I'm not gonna write paragraph after paragraph in the script for this level. All it entails is following Guilty Spark while at the same time battling copious amounts of flood. I know it sounds bad for the game, but in reality, I don't mind a level solely dedicated to just combat and little story, especially since we just got the flood introduced to us. This level gives us a chance to understand the enemy and know the strengths and weaknesses. And for example, a shotgun is super effective against the flood, but when you use a sniper rifle, magnum, to a certain degree the assault rifle, it does jack shit. I like this. It makes it so you have to go after the flood smart. Funniest part about this whole level is that the developers knew that you would be hating it, so they put in subheaders at the bottom left or right of the screen, I can't remember which, after every floor you clean. And normally I'd be mad at this, but it's a Halo game. They make these jokes all the time. After a time spent with Guilty Spark, he reveals that the flood carries spores, which can cause the host of said creature to mutate. Afterwards, the host will spread to even more spores. So effectively, if there's a host for the flood will never die, and the only way to make sure that they're defeated is to kill the flood's food. And later, this is specifically stated before Master Chief tries to fire the Halo ring, and Cortana stops him. And I love this world building involved with the flood. To hear that the only way to kill the flood is to kill every living thing is a scary thought. They're living species, but at the same time they act as a virus or, a bacteria or, I don't know. It's an incredible world building thing, as I said previously, and Bungie will always be excellent at that. Within these little brief conversations that Guilty Spark has with us, he mentions that the rings are the only way to effectively end the flood threat, which would indicate that the rings are meant to kill the flood's food, which is humans, Covenant, and every living thing in the galaxy. As said previously, the best part about this is it's said in passing. So while battling the flood, you may not even hear Guilty Spark say such things. In fact, the only way I knew what he was saying was through subtitles. Later, Cortana will actually tell you what the ring is meant for, and Chief acts confused. He didn't hear Guilty Spark, and neither did we, because we were fighting enemies. For some people, this may be irritating, but for me, I kind of love that attention to detail. Again, in the brief conversations, Guilty Spark says that the Covenant were the perpetrators behind the release of the flood. Seems about right, and that they seem very persistent when it comes to accessing restricted areas. And now, for people that have played the entire Halo series, we all know why they were trying to access those areas. It's because of religious beliefs. They think that the Halo rings are sacred objects and shit, which we will get into in the sequel. It elaborates further, even to an extremely high degree. He then goes on to say that the flood is too dangerous to be released because if so, it's extremely hard to stop them. He then says that the reason they're kept on the ring was for study. I hate this trope in media, but regardless, he does admit that it's a horrendous idea. At the end of the level, a cutscene plays, and to keep it short, Chief unlocks the index, which is a key in which the Halo ring will fire, effectively stopping the flood. And when he does this, Guilty Spark immediately takes the index away from him and states that, he needs to have possession of the index for the sole purpose of transportation. Since Chief is an organic life form, the flood can easily kill him and gain access to it. Guilty Spark is immune to the flood, so of course he's going to take it, ending the mission. So in 2 Betrayals, I decided to play co-op with my homie Richard, or aka Alex Star. Other than him being one of my best friends and I love playing games with him, I will be honest and say it was also because I feared this level. And not because it's too hard or anything, but it's the same as Assault on the Control Room, but backwards, with the implementation of the flood, which makes it different, but it's to its detriment. Anyways, Chief teleports to the control room along with 343 Guilty Spark, and Guilty Spark tells us that his role in this has come to an end. His protocol doesn't allow him to activate the index, only a reclaimer can. And just to touch base on what a reclaimer is, essentially a species known as the Forerunner, as previously stated in other levels, called humanity reclaimers. And this was because they're the inheritors of the mantle of responsibility. It's confusing what that is, so I'm going to explain that in future titles, so just wait until those come out. But regardless, Guilty Spark refers to him as reclaimer because he's a Forerunner AI, and that seems simple enough to understand. Chief is about to fire the Halo Halo until Cortana pops up out of nowhere, and at this point, I'll be honest, I completely forgot that she was still stuck in the control room. She goes on this tangent about Guilty Spark, honestly, kind of sounding jealous, but then she mentions that we had no idea what he was about to do. Chief thinks that firing the Halo would just destroy the Flood, easy peasy, lemon squeezy, right? But previously stated in the last level, Guilty Spark tells us that the only way to kill the Flood is to take away their food, us, dooming all of humanity and other races. After all of this, Cortana and Guilty Spark have a little sissy fight, which is kind of funny to watch. But after all of the information Chief absorbs, Cortana asks us to talk to Guilty Spark and see if anything Cortana says was correct, and of course he says yes, and that he even told us every step of the way. He's right, at least in the subtitles. He tells us that the ring will wipe out anything within a radius of 25,000 light years. Do you have any idea how long of a distance that is? Fucking Christ. Not only that, but when combined with the other Halo rings, the pulse will devour an entire galaxy. Think about that for a minute. Right after Cortana says that, she says she's picking up movement and we need to get a move on. Like I said before, this level is really Assault on the Control Room, but backwards. Only the Flood is added. One of the biggest letdowns for me in this game is the reversal levels, where you have to backtrack and go where you came. I will never understand the reasoning behind this, as it just shouts lazy and uninspiring. I do know the Bungie team was inexperienced while making this game, as in FPSs, but it still doesn't dampen the blow. Even in the 2000s, I don't even think many games did this because they knew the player would get bored and angry. So why do it here? I will never know. Something that's new in this level though is fighting against the Sentinels. They're good enemies. They add verticality, which is a good change. Other than that, I can't really say much about them. I'm going to talk about them more in the sequel because they're more abundant. Going into the mission, Cortana tells us that we need to overload the pulse generators that are in these canyons. The reason being is to distract Guilty Spark in repairing them, buying us time. Problem is, I don't think she ever mentioned why we need to buy time. Was it to escape? I may have missed this dialogue, but if not, it's kind of a huge plot hole and it would bring down the game's narrative. But let me know in the comments. Regardless, that's literally all we must do, so I'm going to skip over the majority of the gameplay. I doubt any of you want to see step-by-step gameplay on how we destroyed the generators after like 20 minutes of shooting shit. Cortana tells us that she has located the Pillar of Autumn and that her fusion reactors are still powered up. Cortana then states that we need to locate the captain and get his neural implants. This is because even Cortana doesn't even have the clearance to override the failsafes, apparently. It does make sense because, I mean, she's an AI. It's later shown in Halo 5 she goes rampant, so seems fine to me. We hit the final cutscene. Chief says that we need to get out of here and goes toward the door, but Cortana stops him. She says that there's a teleportation grid that goes throughout the Halo ring, and it's how Guilty Spark travels so fast. The drawback is that it requires a lot of energy to do. Cortana says that she can pull that energy from his suit without permanently damaging the shields, and I don't know why they felt the need to add it in here. It's a sci-fi game. They really only need to say, hey, we can teleport now. You don't need to explain anything else other than that. I mean, it's, what's the year, 2552? I'd hope teleportation's invented then. It's a nitpick, but I don't take it seriously. It's a brief conversation. But after this, it ends the mission. So keys, and before I go into the script, I do want to say this part of it is short, and that's because this level is short and you really go from like point A to point B. And I don't want to go into detail about combat and stuff like that because y'all already know how I feel about it. So let's just dive in. Cortana tells us the Covenant network is now in chaos, and as soon as they found the Flood, they ordered all the ships to get the fuck off the ring. And it's so funny to me how they were the ones who released the Flood, and after doing so, they pussy out. Regardless, the Covenant sent in a strike team to clear out the Flood aboard the Truth and Reconciliation, and they did this because they're afraid that the Flood will repair the ship and find a way off the ring. So now our mission is to see where Captain Keyes is and see if we can rescue him. And if not, we at least need to get his neural implant. Seems easy enough. Just to briefly go over things once again, this level is mostly the same as Truth and Reconciliation. Therefore, I won't be going into level design, all that shit. So rather, I'm going to go over story beats. I hate having to do this for CE, but all of it's copy paste. So I will say though, throughout the level, there are a few variations, such as, you know, when you first get dropped into the canyon, coolant liquid is everywhere, creating little ponds, and the ship is destroyed, so the walls are slightly different, but in reality, that's it. Kind of disappointing. Of course, you'll get your occasional Flood horde spree coming after you in these tight hallways, which will always have you on edge. Other than that, combat's mediocre regardless. Cortana tells us that the ship should have already gone critical, indicating that the Flood is repairing the ship at an extremely fast rate. It makes it so we want to hurry and do our best to save the captain. After we get on the ship, everything is pretty standard, as I said before. Flood, Covenant, all that shit right. We then get to the captain, who looks like an obese turd, and in canon, these are known as proto-grave mines. They act as central intelligence for the Flood. Anyways, Cortana tells us that his vitals have flatlined, meaning the motherfucker's dead. So what do we do now? We punch his head in so we can get the neural implant. Jesus Christ. No respect for the dead. Afterwards, we get overrun by Flood, yada yada. You already know. When this happened, Chief and Cortana need to escape, and they find a couple banshees conveniently placed, and they get the fuck out of Dodge. Alright, the Maw. At the beginning of the mission, the camera pans around the Pillar of Autumn, and afterwards we cut to Master Chief piloting a Banshee. He's going to land, but the Chief isn't slowing down, and Cortana makes a big fuss about it. I kind of find this comedy fitting within Halo. It just shows the chemistry between Chief and Cortana. She talks to Chief and states that she thinks he did it on purpose, and he doesn't say anything. And right after, we just dive headfirst into the mission. As always, the combat's mostly the same through this level, even though this level is the same as the first one as we played. It does have enough difference in it to feel like an entirely different level, though. The Flood just swarms you, and there are new rooms to explore, more weapons that are given to you, and overall just more chaos is involved. Cortana tells us that we need to get to the bridge as fast as we can, and the reason being is because it's a place where we can use the neural implants that we got from Captain Keyes and cause an explosion involving the fusion engines. This will cause the ring to explode and hopefully ending the Flood threat once and for all, as well as getting rid of Guilty Spark. We go down countless hallways and corridors, defeating the Covenant, the Flood, but once we do all of that, we finally get to the deck of the ship, and at this moment, Cortana tells us that we need to jack her into the console. Cutscene plays out where Cortana tells us that once everything is set in stone, we still should have enough time to get into a lifeboat and be able to survive the explosion. As soon as this happens, Guilty Spark comes out of nowhere and pretty much says, "You fucking thought?" and makes it so the neural implants that we needed to get is now useless. So great, the level Keyes was for nothing. Now I understand why they put this in here, so we can enjoy a longer level and to put the reversal in there, but the bad thing is you negated the previous level, and there were so many other options in order for you to, you know, delay game time. But using the excuse that Guilty Spark hacked the ship so we can't use the implant is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Regardless, Chief asks where Guilty Spark is. Cortana says that he's in the engineering room trying to take the core offline, and Chief pitches the idea to use an explosive to destroy the engine shields, effectively destroying the engines as a whole and the ship. And I think that's what he said with the shields. I may be wrong, correct me in the comments. Y'all need to watch this cringe ass conversation though. It's hilarious. The animation with him throwing the grenade up and down for intimidation purposes is just god awful. And once the cutscene ends, Sentinels appear and we of course defeat them. We made our way down hallways in order to get to the engineering room, and along the way I grabbed a rocket launcher to destroy the engines. And as soon as we get to the engine room, the main thing that we have to do is open up these long rectangular things, and there's 4 of them, and once we expose those cores, we then shoot a rocket or throw a grenade in and destroy it. Yes, this is tedious, but it's manageable. It's not the worst. And once we destroy everything, Cortana tells us to go to an elevator that's at the top of the floor of the room, and we get there and lifts us up. We then get to a vehicle bay filled with warthogs, kicking off the ending with a warthog run with a timer. And although I hate timers, I love this, and it gives you a reason to go fast and try to get the best time possible. I may be wrong, but I think on harder difficulties the timer will change, but if not, let me know. This Warthog run is so fun. I wanted to do it again. The only downside to this is the controls, but I'm not going to dog on the controls again, so just don't worry about that. I've done enough shit talking, and I'm just over it. As soon as we get to the place where we're meant to meet Foehammer, we see that she's going down with no way of controlling the Pelican. Unfortunately, we lose Foehammer to a couple of Banshees, and although this was sad to see, I never really felt connected to Foehammer, and I wish they did more storytelling and character development with her, and it was a missed opportunity. Regardless, we push through, making our way towards the end of the mission. And once we get to the Saber, which is the jet thing, kind of, I think that's what it is. If not, once again, let me know in the comments. But yeah, we get out of the Warthog, go to the Saber, and there's Flood chasing after us, trailing behind, and it ends the mission. Now, my audio wasn't working right in this recording, so I'm going to find someone else's footage and credit the channel underneath. It's going to be in the video, of course, and also I'm going to link it in the description. But I want you guys to like listen to this and see this, because this ending and cutscene in its entirety is just a masterpiece.
We're cutting it close.
Here we go.
down. We'll need them later. Fancy a look? Scanning. Just dust and echoes. We're all that's left. We did what we had to do for Earth. An entire Covenant armada obliterated, and the Flood. We had no choice. Halo, it's finished.
No. I think we're just getting started.
Halo CE has its flaws, of course, but to be honest, it is a story worth experiencing. And before we get to the final decision based on if the game was a masterpiece or not, let me go over the rankings. The lowest ranking is not even close. This means that the game was nowhere near a masterpiece. The next is it has potential, and this means that the game is good enough to where if there was some fixes here and there, it could be close to being a good game. Next is amazing. This means the game is extremely good, but not enough to say it's a masterpiece. Need to add some things here and there. And finally, the next is masterpiece, self-explanatory. So with everything explained, I'm gonna say the game has potential. And now listen, I know that a lot of people love this game, and rightfully so, but to say that this game is still a masterpiece in 2022 is just crazy to me. Copy-pasted rooms, the plot holes, and the reversal levels, you can clearly tell that this game was rushed, and the developers cut corners. If they took their time and perfected their vision, then this game could have very well been a masterpiece. Anyways, that's gonna do it for the video. If you like these kinds of videos, be sure to like and comment. It would mean the world to me if you guys gave me support on this. It took me a while to make, and I was having fun while doing so, which it's been a while since that happened. Also, in the comments, let me know what game you want me to review next. The choices are Cyberpunk 2077, Far Cry 3, or Spider-Man 2018. And now you guys probably will be asking, what about Halo 2? And trust me, that's going to be coming after the next review. I want there to be space in between so I don't get burned out. Anyways, as always guys, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time. Later, homies.